Bob Scully's World Show is brought to you by Fiera Capital. The power of thinking, optimal performance, intelligent innovation.
Hi, this is Bob Scully, and welcome to another edition of the World Show, Free Markets, the Fiera Series, coming to you from Miami this week. And on this episode, a very, very familiar face, if you've been watching television at all for the past 2 decades, John Stossel, formerly of ABC News, now of Fox, a man who has moved from consumer reporting to a libertarian worldview. Now, how did that happen and why? Here's what he has to say. John Stossel, there's a great intersection between an event in your life and your beliefs that I want to quote. It's something you wrote, I would think, on your blog. I write this from the hospital. Seems I have lung cancer. My doctors tell me my growth was caught early and I'll be fine. Soon I will barely notice that a fifth of my lung is gone. I believe them. After all, I'm at New York Presbyterian, U.S. News and World Report, ranked at #1 in New York. I get excellent medical care here. But as a consumer reporter, I have to say, the hospital's customer service stinks. Doctors keep me waiting for hours, and no one bothers to call or email to say I'm running late. Few doctors give out their email address. Patients can't communicate using modern technology. And on it goes in a great dissection, no pun intended, of this really terrible system. Not the people in it, but the system. And that's where you sit today. You live what we all live through. But you see it through the lens of a libertarian. And can we see how you got there?
I just get ticked off at stupid stuff. And that's what I saw. Needless discomfort and waiting. And the libertarian part is that I have learned, because it's not intuitive, that this happens more often when there's not a market. When there's a market, everybody's trying to act better every second, and things get better. But the hospital is sort of a market because some people pay some of their own money. But for a real market to work, it's got to be the customer and the seller dealing directly with each other, spending their own money. In the hospital, the customer is the insurance company or the government. They pay the bills, and the patient comes third or maybe fourth after the lawyers. Because every time something goes wrong, it's so hugely expensive because the American legal system is worse than yours in Canada. And they write in all kinds of rules. Every nurse must always do this because something happened years in the past.
Yeah, you quote some rules, intersecting rules that concerning nurses, and it's illegible. And it's on what they're allowed to do and not do.
Right, and this was a non-union hospital, so it's better than many. They're freer to try reasonable things, but the barnacles of old law stop us from being reasonable, unless there's a market. When people say, I want to make this guy's money, I'm going to have to do better. And I can't wait every 4 years when some new person gets elected. I have to be better tomorrow, or the competitor is going to take my business because I keep people waiting and we don't bother to email and we don't let the patient go to sleep because machines beep all night that mean nothing, but we don't care because no one sues us because you can't sleep.
And you also point out all the contradictions that flow from that. For instance, there's no real pricing, and there's no real pricing because the system says, oh, it's too complex. It concerns human life and so on, but you point out airplanes fly, all kinds of complex systems happen with competition and proper pricing. There's no transparency, to use a fashionable word.
There's only transparency when you're selling directly to the customer. Another example is cars. You can argue that it's so complex. It's got so many moving parts. I'm not an engineer. I'm not a safety expert. I don't know which one is safer, which one will run better. We better have the experts plan this. And you have different kind of experts. In the Soviet Union, the East German experts made the Trabant.
Yeah.
And we joke about he's no rocket scientist. I mean, these were rocket scientists. They were East German geniuses. And the best car they could produce was this horrible car. They had a 4 or 5 year wait list for it. It was hard to drive. It polluted. It disappeared as soon as the wall fell.
Yeah. Except as an object of curiosity.
Art.
Collector.
This guy in Indiana with 6 of them. How come their best, designed by geniuses, couldn't compete with our mediocre stuff? Because they didn't have a real market. And with the real market, you don't need people to be experts. You just need a few car buffs, a few people to read the car magazines. And through word of mouth, the good and bad news spread. And to keep the business, they have to keep making cars better, and they do. Government never improves. It just stays the same, doing what it always did.
And you point out there's other areas of healthcare, dentists, vets actually, which is not human healthcare, but still, there you get a price, you get a service, you can pick who you want. If you're not satisfied, you can complain or go to another one. The rest of the system could eventually come back to the basics.
In Canada, I understand that the wait is months for knee
It's terrible.
surgery, but
Yeah.
for your dog, you can get in next day.
Yeah, absolutely. And dentists, it works quite well. And therefore, you see through this whole bureaucratic socialistic shroud. But how did you come to that? You were a consumer reporter, and I'd like you to tell a story, very admired, seeing through other forms of abuse in the private sector. Everybody loved you in the profession until.
Those were the days.
Yeah.
Until I finally woke up. It's sort of a long story. I just came out of college like a typical left-wing reporter. I saw abuses, consumer abuses. We covered them. We won awards for that. I was a little different because I'm a stutterer, and I wasn't eager to jump off the consumer affairs beat. I thought, well, I can specialize. I won't have to go to the press conference and try to shout out questions and humiliate myself. So I stayed in the consumer affairs beat, and I gradually saw how this regulation all we consumer activists were calling for sounded good, but it made things worse. It didn't solve the problem. The cheaters kept cheating. The people even selling the obvious phony stuff, the breast enlargers, the penis enlargers. the authorities wouldn't even crack down on them until 20 years into the scam, and then they would just change the name of their company and move to another state. The regulation just made everything cost more, drowned companies in paperwork, so people use their creative energy trying to figure out how to beat the system so to make the product better. And by and large, it didn't make any difference. Consumers saw a few get ripped off, always will. Most won't, because the best way to get really rich in a free society is to serve your customers well. I saw that the left wing regulate them to death wasn't working, didn't make sense. So I got sick of the times and I started reading the right wing. But the right wing in America seemed to want to go to war with everyone and to wage war in people's bedrooms. And as a child of the 60s, I didn't like that. So I kept reading and I discovered Reason magazine, and it was an epiphany. Oh, these people understand it much better than I do. I'm a libertarian, who knew?
And it's amusing, well, it's amusing now, it probably wasn't amusing then, to describe how the profession reacted to you before and after. Before, you won 18 Emmys, you were brave, you were courageous.
19 Emmys.
19, wow. And you were attacking fearlessly vested interests of all kinds, and more power to you. Then, the day you started applying that to public servants and public services, you were unfrequentable. You were suddenly persona non grata, and you even say Ralph Nader used to idolize you, and then he wouldn't even talk to you. It's incredible.
He said, "I'm the most dishonest reporter he's ever known," was his comment to the Washington Post. I mean, it wasn't that bad. ABC didn't fire me. They let me do some of my stories that I wanted to do about problems in government. But you said I used to go after everybody, but no, I didn't. I went after businesses. And the media don't like business. And I won those 19 Emmys. And then I saw that maybe I should report on government, or maybe one turning point for me was an hour show we did on We're Scaring You to Death. the various risks imposed by things that the media hype versus what's really like to kill you and what's really likely to kill you. And one argument made was that regulation itself would kill you because all that paperwork means the new product doesn't get invented, or we assume we're protected when we're not. One economist argued the best auto safety device would be a spike right here in front of you to make you drive more carefully. I don't buy that. But a lot of this stuff has unintended consequences, and people did, just the groups of journalistic poobahs didn't like it. The customers seemed to like it. My shows got good ratings.
But that was enough to, okay, ABC didn't fire you, but it led you elsewhere. You felt the heat, or you got tired of being snubbed, or you went through a...
I got tired of fighting to put these ideas on. 2020 was, oh, this company's killing people, this company's killing people. They're comfortable with that kind of story. I was allowed to do it, but it was a fight. I did one short piece, 6-7 minutes, on the folly of rent control. Economist Walter Williams points out that if you want to destroy a city, you can bomb it, or you can just pass rent control. And nobody improves a building, property deteriorates, but this goes contrary to what seems like kind thinking. We want to protect the poor. We can't subject them to market greedy rates. And they think they're doing something good. All economists just about agree that rent control is a bad thing that hurts poor people. But I could not get this show on ABC for months. What do you mean? This can't be true. The lawyer who approved it, I live in a rent control building. This can't be true.
But a lot of those things have sunk in. This idea about rent control, it's like minimum wage. There's still a big debate on them, but the other point of view, meaning that they may not be such great ideas, you hear it more and more.
You do hear it more now. At the time, you never heard it. And minimum wage has sunk in. They keep passing new ones, so it hasn't sunk in very far.
No, that's true. There's still a debate, but it's not an unknown, far-fetched idea now to criticize.
That's true. And I think it's only far-fetched and weird to the kind of people who enter the mainstream media.
So the bias is there, eh?
The bias is really
Albanian, at CBC, we used to call them Albanian communists, referring to some of the higher-ups in news, and they certainly sounded like that, although they weren't aggressive towards business reporters, which you seem to have gone
It's
through.
just like pushing string. It's a collaborative job, TV, and unless you have everyone's cooperation, you can't get it done. And eventually, ABC just didn't want to do those stories. Now, in fairness, my ratings were down because people who wanted real news by then were starting to go to CNN, MSNBC, and Fox. So more of the 2020 audience, now they do mostly sex murders and celebrities. It's mostly people who want that rather than investigation.
And have you come to a conviction, an inner conviction as to why, very often you'll refer, in the research what I've read is you'll say, well, people have a tendency to like central control. They like it when the government watches over them. They feel reassured by a government program. And those are human tendencies. Are they inevitable, and will they always be with us?
I fear so. I really thought that I discovered this. Oh my God, it's so obvious to me. And once I explain this to people, they'll understand. But some of us get it. We're inclined to get it. But most people won't. My own wife, after 30 years of near constant argument, has moved an inch, but not a foot. It's just against her instinct to think laissez-faire could be better, the spontaneous order. You know, people will be hurt. Some people will have their lives wrecked before you get to your perfect world, John. But I think we get to the better world a lot quicker when people are left free to pursue their own goals and are not bound by rules that keep them from trying new things.
And are you, John the Baptist, do you go across the desert preaching the gospel or not?
Yeah, that's why I can't stop. I understand this now. I have a knack at explaining it to people simply and using video. It's my duty now to keep doing as much of that as I can until I croak, because these ideas are what make life better for rich people and poor people. They bring us music, fresh fruit in the winter, beautiful entertainment, longer lifespans, less pain. When there's prosperity, everybody's life gets better. We know it works. We've seen it in Hong Kong, New Zealand, Australia, the United States, Canada. And yet, idiot politicians keep putting their fist up and stopping it.
Now, not to be a knee-jerk optimist, wouldn't you say that just as some of these sort of bureaucratic instincts are very hard to uproot, at the same time, though, the market economy and certain things that do work very, very well have become so desirable, and the cost of certain products coming down and all kinds of things like that, productivity, some of those things work so well that they are gaining. In other words, the other side is making victories and progress. It's just not obvious. It's only when you say it that they bite you back.
I would say yes and no. Clearly they're making progress. I mean, we should all thank capitalism when we go to the supermarket. 30,000 products. The aisles are wide. It's well lit. It's open 24/7, unlike anything government does. But nobody thanks free markets in this. We just take it for granted.
Yes.
And that's the problem. And successful as it's been, when the new thing comes, the politicians will try to stop it. I mean, Uber and Airbnb are good examples of companies that didn't have any infrastructure. They're not like a pharmaceutical plant that takes 10 years to build and you have to get permission first. This was the permissionless innovation. And by the time they needed permission, they were huge and had billions so they could lobby against the politicians. Still, Uber, despite being vastly better than the cab system, gets banned in Austin by the trendy politicians there. So if Uber and Airbnb can sneak in under the onslaught of rules, and they're so much better, they can win. They can barely win. What hope does the next nuclear plant have, or next chemical plant?
Is environmentalism a refuge for a new religion?
Yes.
Yes. As they say in high school, please
It makes
explain.
you feel good to recycle. It probably doesn't make any difference. It makes you feel good to buy a slightly less polluting car. But it's a religion because it's worse than a religion, because in a religion you can voluntarily donate or not. In this case, the government forces us to spend more for power. I can afford it, but some poor people can't. To make symbolic gestures that even if global warming really is a threat and man plays that big a part of it, all this stuff we're subsidizing and forcing will make minuscule difference. Far better to wait and see what happens, and when our technology is better and when we're wealthier in 20 years, then adjust to it or do what science tells us then.
But a lot of environmentalists will say we'll be barbecued by then.
They've been saying that for years. And as a consumer reporter, this is what finally woke me up. Everything was going to kill you. We got to do a story in big pens. They're spontaneously exploding in people's pockets. And this came from some trial lawyer. It had happened. They had horrible pictures. There's an evil partnership between the trial lawyers and journalists. But pesticides were causing the cancer epidemic. I believed for a long time. There is no cancer epidemic, by the way. Cancer rates are flat. By the time global warming came around, I had already seen all the scientists agree fail many times. Y2K.
Y2K was a balloon that burst.
The computer, when it hits
the next day, actually,
the computers are going to crash, and the planes did not fall down.
But do you ever find yourself, for the sake of argument, or because you're facing the devil's advocate, conceding that there are some dangers that require regulation, which makes the argument more complete? And what are they, for instance?
The environment. There's no market incentive to behave well. My smoke goes to your lungs. My effluent maybe to your drinking water. You could have property rights and sue, but it's just too cumbersome in our legal system. So government ought to keep the peace and protect the environment. But it's done that. EPA should stand for enough protection already. 90% of the pollution is gone, with sulfur dioxides taken out of the factories with scrubbers, the pollution controls on cars. Every time you buy a new car, the air gets cleaner. So the water is Hudson River is swimmable. They've made great progress. Thank God for government. Enough already.
We had a professor in that chair who was an environmental specialist from York University, I believe in Toronto, demonstrating that oil initially cleaned up America, which was true because it took away the horse manure and the horse carcasses, and it reforested the agricultural land because less horses were being used, and so forth. It stunned me when we got the hate mail, what kind of a button that pushes.
It's religious. You can't say it. We know fossil fuel is destroying the planet, and people want to worry about something. We're programmed by evolution to look for lions and tigers.
So do you get sort of spiteful, hateful reactions through the web or otherwise?
I do. I used to get mail, now and then email, and now it's Twitter and Facebook.
And they come after you?
Well, they're not shooting at me. I can't complain. Some of it's hateful. The Donald Trump fans are just viciously hateful. You used to be okay, and now you're sleazy corporate shill. There's always going to be some criticism.
And do you? I was asking you if you spread the gospel. Do you do speeches?
I do. I'm here in Florida to play beach volleyball, actually, but also to speak at the Atlas Network. And I love giving speeches, because on TV, you can't hear people laugh or applaud.
True.
In speeches, you do.
And Charles Murray, again in this series, told us about, in his new book, a technique he recommends for people to fight back against government and its mistakes. And it's to have these groups, these popular groups, that will name, for instance, a civil servant publicly who's denied them a permit which he shouldn't have denied them, or who has made up a ridiculous rule. And he says, if you do that kind of thing, it's a form of anarchy, I suppose. If you do that kind of thing well and frequently enough, and have some legal funds to fight the battle, real democracy will return to the American system. What do you think of that?
I like his idea, selective civil disobedience, he called it. And if any billionaires watching want to create this Madison Fund and fight some of these lawsuits, it's a little like the Institute for Justice taking business licensing cases. But the instinct of a bureaucrat will always be to pass more rules. If you're an EPA bureaucrat and you're not adding a rule, you think you're not doing your job. So we can fight and slow it down and get rid of some, and people will see the successes of Uber and say, maybe we don't need all these taxi rules. But it's the natural progress of things for government to grow and liberty to yield. Thomas Jefferson said that, and he was right. Germany and Japan succeeded so well after World War II.
Yes.
Because we bombed them to smithereens, and all their guilds that limited what people could do were gone. They started over, industrious people starting over with limited government, make themselves prosperous. And
since we're on the international stage with that sentence, how about very authoritarian governments that seem impossible to overthrow? I'm thinking of the Chinese and governments like that or Castro. They've never been seriously threatened. Are we stuck with guys like that forever?
I used to think, we see Hong Kong, one generation, poverty to wealth. Everybody will imitate this model. But I fear socialism is appealing to many minds, and there will always be some Venezuelans. I'm struck how in Chile, they had some free market reforms that made it the most prosperous country in Latin America. One part of it was Jose Piñera's pushing private passbook retirement accounts. So you could see how much you had. And at the time, people were excited about it. It was better than government doing it. But now they demonstrate in the streets because they say, I didn't make enough money in my account. And the company that's administering it is taking out, and the fees may be a little high, but there's 6 of them. I think they would compete. People instinctively turn to socialism. We who believe in liberalism and free markets, I think, will always have to fight that battle.
And will.
And will.
John Stossel, thank you very much.
Thank you.
John Stossel. And now here's something else coming up on the World Show.
Well, you try to be responsible, respectful. I'm a fairly private person, but I can deal with it. I don't think it ever went to my head. That's one good thing I can say about myself. I don't think, but that will contradict it right there. I don't think that I've ever become swell-headed about the fact that plays might have been successful. Playwrights do not get the kind of celebrity, by the way, that movie stars get and rock stars. You know, one can walk down miles in New York City without anybody recognizing you or anything, which is fine. And sometimes your name is known, or the play that you've written. Oh, you did that? My goodness, how interesting. So we don't have to worry about celebrity in that particular sense. We do have to worry about the fact that quite often if you write a play in one style, people want you to keep repeating yourself. Why aren't you writing Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf all over again? Why are you writing plays, metaphysical melodramas like Tiny Alice? Why are you writing a play like Seascape, which has 2 lizards in it and 2 human beings? Why don't you do what we know? You have to worry about that sometimes.
John Stossel was our guest this week on Free Markets, the Fiera series of the World Show. I'm Bob Scully. Have a great week. Thanks.
Bob Scully's World Show was brought to you by Fiera Capital. The power of thinking, optimal performance, intelligent innovation.